I was going to say good morning, everyone, but it's now very early afternoon. On behalf of the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council, we would like to greet you. This is the 7th election cycle where George and I have been a team and put together debates, and we have to say we're delighted that there's so much interest in this particular campaign. We do want to recognize some of the media that has traveled here. We have American Rising, 2 folks from the Associated Press, Channel 4 in Boston, the Boston Globe, the New Hampshire Journal, the Union Leader, New Hampshire One, and of course, the Conway Daily Sun and our local cable access station. So I also want to thank New Hampshire Electric Co-op. They are the sponsors for the Eggs and Issues series, and as those of you who are local know, it's a monthly meeting that we have providing information for our business community. We also have 3 diamond sponsors, the Bank of New Hampshire, HEB Engineers, and Glenn Group. We thank them very much because as a nonprofit, fundraising is of the essence in order for us to continue doing the chores that we do. And without much further ado, I want to introduce my colleague who has been conducting our debates now for 7 election cycles. George, for those of you who don't know him, was Entrepreneur of the Year in New Hampshire. He's the founder and owner of Echo Software, which is behavioral health software. He also is moderator in the town of Madison. Plus, he's been a buddy of mine now for over 30 years. So without further ado, George.
Thank you. She touched my laptop here, and I can't read anything that's on the screen now. I'm in complete panic. Thank you. This is a terrific turnout. I thank you all very much for coming. I am incredibly nervous. I've never had this many cameras pointed at me. These 2 are professionals, but I'm a little bit nervous, so let's see how I do. First, I'm going to point out that you folks have 2 responsibilities here. One is to make sure you get out and vote on November 4th and vote for the candidate that most impresses you, I hope, here. And the other responsibility for you is to listen to the questions that I ask and the answers, and to make sure the candidates actually answered the question. Not just that the answer sounded good, but that it actually was responsive to the question. That's your challenge sitting here in the audience. We're going to have some fun here today. I think it's going to be interesting and informative, and we're going to get right to it. I'm going to point out that the coin flip resulted in Senator Shaheen speaking first, both the opening statement and the closing statement. Senator Brown was the winner of the coin flip, so he gets to go second in both the opening statement and in the closing statement. And we're going to talk about gambling later in the discussion. I will not refer to the 2 candidates as senator from now on, not because they're not deserving of it, but just to be as even-handed as possible. I will refer to them by their full names. So I'm going to start by asking Jean Shaheen to provide us with her opening statement. And you are authorized to applaud at the end of the opening statements and at the end of the closing statements, but I'll ask you to be quiet throughout the rest of the debate in order for us to hear as much from the candidates as we possibly can. Jean Shaheen.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be able to join you. Thank you to the Mount Washington Valley Economic.
What? I'm sorry. I'll take responsibility for this.
Is that better? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can you hear? I don't think that's good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And those of you in the back, can you hear? In the back, way back in the room? All right, good. Well, thank you, George, for that introduction, and thank you for
Could the hotel folks help us out here a little bit? She escaped from the room. She was going to be here to help me if I needed it.
It may be this mic.
No, that has nothing to do, I don't think.
Well, it feels like it's live.
It should be direct. I'm going to talk. I'm going to test 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind standing just a little bit of an angle from it and see if that helps.
Well, it's an angle now. Can you hear now?
I'm going to ask you, if I get this up, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm going to ask you to stand just a little bit further over here. And I'm going to ask you to speak now. Quiet, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We'll try it again. Well, again, thank you to George for moderating this morning. Thank you to the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council for hosting this debate. It's nice to be here with my opponent. And I want to thank the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council most of all for what you do every day to ensure that we have a strong economy in the Mount Washington Valley. Now, I was privileged in my 6 years as governor and in the past 6 years as senator to work with you all in promoting the hardworking people of this region, the innovative businesses that are here, and the beautiful landscape and natural resources that are so important to the valley. I know we're going to discuss a number of issues about how to continue to grow the economy in this region in the future, and I look forward to sharing with you my thoughts about how to best to support small businesses, education, and other ways to grow this economy, and I think you will hear clear differences between me and my opponent. So thank you all again very much.
Thank you, Gene Shaheen, and again, my apologies for the sound system. Scott Brown, I hope we do better technically here.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for coming and hosting this event and everybody for participating. Senator Shaheen, it's good to see you again. I'm running for the United States Senate because I care about New Hampshire, care about restoring America. As you know, we have some very serious issues affecting us. I want to make sure that we have a strong and vibrant economy. I want to make sure that we have a position in the world where our allies trust us, our foes respect and fear us. My opponent, Senator Shaheen, has been voting with the president over 99% of the time. And what does that mean for you? That means that you're paying higher taxes. You're paying higher prices for energy. There are fewer jobs. We have a healthcare system that's not functioning properly at this point. And we have an unstable world. Now, last week, the president said this election is about him and his policies, and I agree. So you will have a very clear choice as to who you want to vote for. Somebody who's going to continue to be a rubber stamp for those policies, or somebody who's going to be an independent voter on those issues. Thank you.
Thank you both. And starting with Scott Brown, the federal government is running a $650 billion deficit. We have almost $18 trillion in debt. We have no real budget and haven't had one for years. Sequestration is this cooked-up formula that we currently operate under, and no one believes is the best way for us to decide how to expend our funds. We have a tax system that no one is satisfied with and is highly complex, confusing, and expensive. What would you do? First of all, do you think it's important that we balance our budget, and what would you do to balance our budget? Scott Brown.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Yes, we have very serious issues. We have a tremendous amount of issues affecting our...
I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
Microphone is failing again?
Yeah, well, whatever. We don't need a microphone. It
We
seems
probably
to work.
don't.
Thank you for your question. We have some very serious issues affecting us. We have not done a budget, especially in the United States Senate. And the last budget they did was on the backs of our veterans, which I would not have supported. We have a situation right now where you have $17+ trillion of national debt. The first and most important thing that we can do is actually authorize and encourage the leadership to actually make sure that we do a budget, number one, that is balanced, number two. And we can do that by going through the appropriations process, allowing everybody to say, hey, listen, we need to come up with upwards of $1 trillion because we're running trillion-dollar deficits when it comes to these budgets, and we're not going home on Thursday at 12 o'clock. We're going to stay until we get it done, and we're going to stay through holidays. When we talk about the economic challenges of businesses, of which many of you are here, you look at the high corporate tax rates. We need to repatriate a lot of that offshore money, make sure that we can have a non-governmental stimulus. Senator Coburn has some amazing ideas on looking forward to how to find ways to not only streamline, consolidate, eliminate a lot of the fraud, waste, and abuse right now in the federal government, because the federal government is not a good steward of our money. We need to do those top-to-bottom reviews. We need to look at our military budgets. We need to look at the entitlement programs to make sure that they're sustainable for future generations. We could have a conversation on this one issue alone, and I hope we can get back to it.
And we will spend some more time on this. Shaheen, 1 minute on the general topic of the budget.
I do think our debt and deficits are important. We made some progress in reducing the deficit of this country to about half of what it was when I took office. And I've worked very closely with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to look at how we can reduce the deficit, how we can address spending, reducing spending. I've worked with Tom Coburn, Republican from Oklahoma, to try and address the vehicle budgets in the government because they've grown out of control. Worked with Johnny Isakson, Republican from Georgia, to try and reform the budget process, to put in place a 2-year biennial budget so that we have more time for oversight in the second year of the budget process. Worked with John McCain to try and get rid of a duplicative program that addresses catfish inspection. And this is important to us because we have a number of businesses in the fish processing industry that are important as we think about how do we create jobs in that industry, and this legislation would not allow us to do that. So there's a lot we can do. We need a balanced approach to deal with our debt and deficits.
In order to get at a $650 billion deficit that we're currently running at, though, there are some really hard choices we're going to have to make. We're going to have to make much bigger cuts than in the kinds of things you were just describing, and perhaps we're also going to have to significantly increase taxes. How do we fill a gap between from $650 billion? What are the specific kinds of things we do to entitlements, to tax increases that are going to get at that kind of a number?
Well, I think we do need to look at how we address tax reform. I think we need to close those loopholes that allow big corporations to get away without paying taxes while our small businesses here have to pay taxes. And this is an area where my opponent and I disagree, because I think we should close those loopholes, and he continues to support subsidies to the oil companies to the tune of over $20 billion. He continues to oppose closing loopholes that not only allow companies to ship jobs overseas, but that actually incentivize them to do that. We had legislation when we both served in the Senate that would have closed those tax loopholes. I supported that legislation. It would have provided incentives to bring jobs back home. My opponent opposed that legislation and went one step further. He's now on the board of a company that has as part of its business model to outsource jobs to China and Mexico. I don't think that's the right approach for us. I think we need to close those loopholes. I've worked to do that.
One quick 30-second follow-up. What loopholes are going to produce real bucks for the United States government?
Well, one of the ones that would be significant is the subsidies that we continue to give to the oil companies. That's over $20 billion. Another is addressing the unfair tax code that we have that allows millionaires and billionaires, people like Warren Buffett, to pay less money than the people who work for them. And that would produce about $67 billion. So there's real money there, and if you add it up, you begin to see the impact that it would have. But I'll tell you what I wouldn't do. I would not balance the budget on the backs of our seniors by changing the way we provide cost of living increases for Social Security. My opponent has applauded that. I don't think that's the right approach.
Thank you. I'm going to be merciless to the audience because you'll keep applauding and our candidates will speak less. No hooting either. Let's be well behaved. I was the Madison town moderator now for 27 years. I can keep them behaving. I know I can keep you folks in line as well. Scott Brown, specifically, $650 billion. Tax increases, major cuts in expenditures. How do we get $650 billion covered?
Well, I believe that the federal government has enough of our hard-earned money right now, and we can find those fraud, waste, and abuse, those efficiencies, the very real issues that we all read about and kind of shake our heads about. We can do it without raising taxes. I look forward, I've actually offered to be on that committee to look forward to coming up with those real solutions. There are many things. What's a loophole? Well, the investment tax credit's a loophole. The R&D tax credit's a loophole. The child care tax credit, the homeowner interest deduction. The president is not very specific about what his loopholes and the changes are. When you're talking, and I've heard the attacks, I'm glad she's brought it up, about supposedly working for big oil. Listen, I'm fighting for motorists. I'm not sure if you woke up this morning and said, oh my goodness, the frost is here. We're going to have to turn on our thermostats $650 to $750 last year just to fill the oil tank. Democrats voted against that very same bill, one bill with 2 amendments, to make sure that we did not raise energy prices in the middle of a financial emergency, in the middle of a recession. We can do it better. I look forward to that opportunity.
And your 30-second follow-up, no new taxes, $650 billion in cuts. Where are you going to get that kind of money?
It doesn't necessarily need to be in cuts. It can be done in efficiency. When you read, most recently in the Union Leader, they said $100+ billion and just payments to people that are dead and that aren't entitled to the monies that we're spending. There are a tremendous amount of efficient ways that we can do that. I support a balanced budget amendment. I support the president having the line item veto. We just have a different philosophy about whether you should keep more money in your pocketbooks and wallets or not. I believe the federal government is not a good steward of your money. I believe that the first thing they always do is they say, we need more of your hard-earned money, folks. I disagree with that. There's plenty of money in the federal budget right now.
Sure, we'll talk more about money, but Scott Brown, could you tell us what America's foreign policy is and what the role is of a United States senator in that foreign policy? And I would just add, for some of us who are really old, most of our adult lives, our foreign policy has fit on a bumper sticker. It was contained communism. And since then, we don't seem to have that same kind of clarity. I'd love for you to tell me what America's foreign policy is and what the role of a U.S. senator is.
Well, I believe we need to restore America. And I believe that the president's policies right now are confusing, incoherent, and quite frankly, as Secretary Panetta said, there are fits and starts, there are hesitations that are resulting on our fact that our allies don't trust us and our foes don't fear or respect us. And listen, folks, the world's on fire. You see it with Israel and Hamas. You see it what's happening with Boko Haram. You see it with Putin and Russia. You see what's happening in Afghanistan, obviously in Syria. We see it with ISIS. One of the first things that we need to do, we need to restore American leadership. I believe there is none. Senator Shaheen is a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. She does vote with the president over 99% of the time. And that is also when it comes to foreign relations issues. So we need to find a way to make sure that we have a check and balance. That you'll have somebody who will actually speak up when the president is not doing things appropriately, and somebody who can be there, obviously, to complement and enhance those opportunities.
Shaheen, what is America's foreign policy, and what does a U.S. senator do about it?
The United States has an important role to lead in the world. Sometimes we do that with military might, and we have the strongest military in the world. Sometimes we do it with moral authority. Sometimes we do it at the United Nations. Sometimes we do it with economic assistance. And we have to look at the individual circumstance to see how our foreign policies should work in that particular circumstance. So when Russia invaded the Ukraine, I was on the side of those people who said we need stronger sanctions against Russia. On ISIS, I have been working on this issue since March of last year, talking about what we need to do to build an international coalition to go after the terrorists, talking about how we engage with Syrian opposition groups to make sure that they can do fighting on the ground along with Iraqis. And we understand that this is a serious threat. We saw it with the murders of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff. It made it very personal for us in New Hampshire, and we need to go after those terrorists.
Shaheen, hasn't the United States Congress abrogated its constitutional responsibility to declare war when we fight a war, number one? And number two, hasn't the United States Congress gone way too far in terms of debating and discussing and perhaps undermining presidents for a bunch of years with regard to the specific tactics presidents are taking when they are trying to fight wars?
Well, first of all, I think We do need an authorization for the use of military force when we go into a conflict. I have argued that the president needs to come to Congress for that in going after ISIS, and that if he doesn't, we should take that action in Congress and have that debate. It's important to the American public. It's important to the men and women who are fighting on behalf of America. That's one of the important roles that Congress has to play and what the president does. But you know, one of the things that used to be a truism in terms of Congress is that when we were engaged in conflicts, that partisanship ended at the water, that Democrats and Republicans worked together to support the policies of this country. Sadly, we haven't seen enough of that in the recent years. And I think this is one place where my opponent and I have very different views, because what we need is for people to work together to address these issues. They are serious issues. And what's not helpful is political grandstanding, it's fear-mongering about the challenges that we face.
Scott Brown, constitutional responsibility to declare war lies with the Congress. We've given that up for decades. The Congress yet has lots of opinions about the specifics of how to fight the wars and what specific tactics we should use and so on. What's the role?
Well, first of all, as an American, I want the president to succeed. I want him to be successful in his efforts, not only dealing with President Putin, but also dealing with ISIS and other very real challenges. The problem is that when he said, we're going to draw a red line, and if you cross that line, something really bad is going to happen. Well, that didn't happen. That emboldened our enemies. That emboldened Putin and others to make very different course changes. There is a lack of leadership right now. It is incoherent. It is troubling in that we don't have a clear message as to where we're going and what we're going to do. It's evidenced by not only the administration and some of the things that they're saying. General Dempsey has said, you know, there may be a time that we may need to put ground troops back in Iraq. Unfortunately, I'm not supporting or advocating that, but to take the greatest deterrent, as Senator Shaheen said, our military off the table, it's confusing. It sends a very real message. ISIS is not taking anything off the table, but we're already taking something off the table. So my question is, what if airstrikes don't work? Where are we then? We need to make sure that we can protect America, protect American citizens and their interests.
Very specifically, I'm going to give you each another minute on that topic, if I could. And please, another full minute, Scott Brown. Do you favor the bombing of ISIS that is going on right now? And what are we trying to accomplish by that bombing? Are we just trying to kill a bunch of people that we don't like and who murdered American citizens? Are we supporting Assad in Syria? Are we supporting a Sunni government, a Shiite government in Iraq that is exclusive of the Sunnis? What are we trying to accomplish by bombing ISIS?
The goal of ISIS is to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue and plant a flag in the White House. Our goal is to make sure that doesn't happen. And unfortunately, the president, I believe, as a result of him pulling out of Iraq, remember, Al-Qaeda, ISIS is Al-Qaeda of Iraq, which has morphed into something bigger and badder. They're bank robbers. They've robbed banks. They've gotten equipment. They have an army the size of, and taking area the size of New England. That effort is incoherent. He said that they were the JV. They're not the JV, folks. It's, according to his generals, it's one of the greatest fighting forces that we've seen when it comes to terrorism. And when you have, we signed a letter as members of Armed Services Committee asking the administration, please don't leave Iraq as is. There's going to be a void, and that'll be filled by criminal elements. Senator Ayotte signed it. I signed it. Senator McCain. Senator Shaheen did not sign that letter. She did not let the president know where she stood on that very important issue. And that's part of the problem of supporting the president and his policies 99% of the time. You're not that check and balance, and that's a problem.
Jean Shaheen, ISIS, and what are we trying to accomplish by this bombing? And do you favor it?
I do favor the airstrikes, and I have supported those. I think we're trying to stop the forward advance of ISIS, and that's why we're also supporting the Iraqis as they fight, and vetted Syrian opposition groups so that they can be the boots on the ground. I don't believe we should send tens of thousands of American troops to be an occupying force in the Middle East. But Scott Brown's conveniently missing and rewriting history. The fact is, the agreement that withdrew American troops was signed by George W. Bush before he left office, and the letter he talks about was signed only by Republicans in the Senate. Other members of the Armed Services Committee didn't sign that letter. And when we couldn't get protections for American troops, which is why we withdrew our troops. I also want to go back to his comment about the red line, because I'm one of 10 in the Foreign Relations Committee that when we drew a red line and said the Syrians need to pull out the chemical weapons that they have, I voted to do that. I believe that was important. It meant that we got an agreement to remove those chemical weapons from Syria, and now ISIS can't get access to chemical weapons in the Middle East.
Thank you.
May I address, follow up on that? It's a good topic.
30 seconds more from each candidate. Yes, Scott Brown.
My question to everybody is, what if airstrikes don't work and the generals on the ground make that recommendation? We're hamstrung. I'm not advocating putting forces on the ground, but once again, when you talk about bipartisanship and working together across party lines, I was the most bipartisan senator in the United States Senate, 50-50. Senator Shaheen is voting 99% of the time and has, I believe, and others have believed that she has been supporting those incoherent policies. It's not the JV, folks. It's real. We need to start by securing our borders. We don't know who's coming through. We don't know what efforts are being made. And you saw the 60 Minutes piece last night. We know 12 people right now who want to come back. They're not coming back to build houses with white picket fences. They're coming back to hurt us and change our way of life.
Thank you. And 30 more seconds, Jean Shaheen.
Well, I think all of us could probably agree that anybody who fights for ISIS should give up their American citizenship and their passport, that they are not Americans. But the fact is, we do need to secure our borders. And the way to do that is through comprehensive immigration reform. Unfortunately, my opponent, when he was on the Homeland Security Committee, missed every single hearing that they had on border security. He's made this a hallmark of his campaign, and yet he missed every single hearing. We need serious people who are working on these issues. They're serious. We need to work together to address them.
Excuse me.
Thank you. No, I'm going to stop you there because we've gotten very serious, and I have to, in the interest of seriousness, have to ask Jean Shaheen, what size dog do you like best?
I like big dogs. Our last dog was a yellow lab. His name was Camelot, and sadly we lost him right before the election in 2008, and because we have been so busy, I didn't feel like it was fair to get another one, but I'm looking forward to doing that.
Fair enough. Scott Brown, what size dog do you like best?
My daughter's at Cornell Vet School, and you'll know anybody who's taken up that profession loves all animals equally. We have a baby Yorkie.
They're not buying it.
If you know my daughter, you would. She cares very deeply. We have a baby Yorkie and a Shih Tzu that are part of our family, and they're with her.
Very good. Okay. All right. Do either one of you have cats?
Yes, we
I
have
did.
cats too.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. All right.
Hamsters, turtles,
Okay.
you name it.
Scott Brown, is climate change occurring? If so, is human activity contributing to it? And if so, what are we going to do about it? 1 minute.
I believe it's a combination of man-made and natural, and that's what I've said, and I continue to believe that. The question is, how do we deal with not only respecting our environment, as someone who's hiked Mount Washington with Jeb Bradley and appreciate the environment as a triathlete, swimming, biking, camping, Gail and I, we want to respect that environment. We also want to find a way to balance the ability to live within the environment and use its natural resources to become energy independent, to step back from our dependence on foreign oil. I think that's very critical, and we can find that balance, and there are opportunities to do just that.
Jean Shaheen.
Climate change is real. We've heard from the majority of scientists around the world that that's the case. We've heard that from the University of New Hampshire Climate Center as well. I think we need to take action now to address that. We need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. We need to invest in new energy technologies and energy efficiency. That's what I've supported in the United States Senate. And again, this is a clear difference between my opponent and me, because Scott Brown has voted to support those big oil companies, voted for those subsidies, to the tune of getting about $500,000 from the oil companies in his last election. I think that's the wrong approach. We need to invest in energy efficiency. It's the cheapest, fastest way to deal with our energy needs. We need to look at efforts like the co-op is making. I've had a chance to go out and see what they're doing to work with their ratepayers to try and reduce their energy use. I have legislation in the Senate with Rob Portman, Republican from Ohio, that would do just that.
Shaheen, a follow-up to that, another full minute. Would you accept that currently fossil fuels, thanks to fracking and other things, are the cheapest way of us particularly getting our electricity and certainly driving our cars? And are you willing to accept and believe we must accept the costs that would be added by moving to alternative energy systems?
I don't believe that oil is the cheapest for us here in New England because we pay some of the highest costs for oil heat in the country. It's why I worked so hard when I was governor to try and lower electric rates for the people of New Hampshire. There are some additional costs with some forms of alternative energy, but now people in New Hampshire have choice. Actually, commercial enterprises are able to reduce their energy costs because they've had choices on the retail market. Fortunately, many of those choices are going to homeowners. And the fact is, what we have in New Hampshire are a lot of small businesses that are working on alternative sources of energy. We have companies like SustainX, which is down in Seabrook. It's a company that's working on energy storage, which is critical if we're going to use more solar and wind. They're creating dozens and dozens of jobs because of that company. Those are the kinds of investments we should be making, so we have alternatives to oil and gas.
And Scott Brown, I'm not allowed to call you Senator. Scott Brown, could you talk for a minute specifically about the impact of the costs, if you believe there are some associated with forcing a move, and if not, or if there are those costs, are you willing to accept those costs in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, I think it's important to talk about energy because we all have received notices that energy costs are going to double and maybe go up 50 to 100%. That's real. That's real for businesses. That's real for homeowners, especially as it's getting colder. We are going to have, I believe, a very difficult winter, as we always do. We don't have the storage or delivery capacity for natural gas. I believe in an all-of-the-above approach: wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, geothermal, siting, permitting, allowing citizens to be at the table and not having the federal government mandate these things. We have a big difference. I'm in favor of the Keystone Pipeline. Senator Shaheen is not. She's in favor of cap and trade and has paved the way through her vote to have a new national energy tax. These are things where we do differ. I believe that we should find a way to step back from our dependence on foreign oil, but we need to take all of the issues that people are concerned about and get together and actually work together. That's why, as the most bipartisan senator in the United States Senate, I had a history of doing those very things. So we do have a different opinion, and I look forward to having an opportunity to work on it.
30 seconds. Would you favor or not favor Northern Pass as it stands under its current model? And also, do you believe there's greater regulation needed for fracking?
I have already been on record with regard to Northern Pass. I'm not in favor of it as is. The citizens need to continue to play a role. They need to bury the wires. That seems to be the consensus in terms of getting that project approved. When you're talking about any type of opportunity to step back from our dependence of foreign oil, I believe we have the engineers and the environmentalists and people who care very deeply about our environment that can do it better than anywhere else in the country. To think that we're not going to take advantage of the opportunities to become energy independent to help pay down our debt and deficit, I think is inappropriate and wrong.
And I'm going to go 30 more seconds. Why should the folks in the Midwest have to have the Keystone Pipeline to bring us oil, and we shouldn't have to have the towers and the wires for Northern Pass?
Well, see, they approved it. They've gone through the process. It's been approved even by the State Department. It creates good union and non-union jobs, opportunities and ancillary jobs to help with the economy, which is obviously of a concern for Senator Shaheen and me. But it's been approved top to bottom. This is still in the process. It's in the environmental impact process. Citizens are still making sure that their voices are heard on this, and there needs to be obviously more work in that regard. So the difference is that one's much further along. It's really a no-brainer to get more energy in the system to step back from our dependence of foreign oil.
Thank you. Gene Shaheen, would you take a full minute to talk about Keystone Pipeline, fracking, and Northern Pass?
I don't believe that we're going to get off oil in my lifetime, but I do believe we need to invest in alternative sources of energy, in energy efficiency, and new energy technologies. Now, I believe that Northern Pass needs to go through its environmental process. We need to make sure that we in New Hampshire have lots of input into that. I think we need to look at considering what needs to be buried about those wires. And what my opponent has said about the Keystone Pipeline would bypass the environmental process on Keystone. I don't think that's right because I think it would have real implications for us. I do think we need more regulation around fracking because it has serious implications for our water use, though not here in New England, but in other parts of the country, and that's challenging. But, you know, again, this is an area where my opponent and I have very different views because I think we need to end the subsidies to the big oil companies and we need to support new energy technologies.
Gene Shaheen, the IRS scandal, their unfair looking at specific types of organizations, the Secret Service's recent performance, the Center for Disease Control and their handling of anthrax, the children at our borders that were piled up there. We'll come back more detail to immigration. The VA and its performance. Is our federal government competent to do all the things we ask it to do? And if not, what's the role of a U.S. Senator to improve that situation? Should we stop doing stuff, or should we just keep investigating?
No, I think we need to make sure that our federal government performs more efficiently and more effectively. And that's one of the roles we have as members of Congress to make sure that that happens. It's one of the reasons I've supported a biennial budget process because I think we need the first year to do a budget and the second year to provide oversight. That's what we have in New Hampshire. That's what we should be doing in Washington, I believe. That's one of the reasons I've worked with Senator Bozeman, who's a Republican from Arkansas, to increase support for inspectors general, because inspectors general are in each agency and they can make sure those agencies are performing the way they should. This is an issue about making sure that our government works and that it works better. That's what I've tried to do in the Senate. It's what I did when I was governor. And we need to make sure that when the federal government is doing something, that it does it effectively and efficiently.
Scott Brown, how does a U.S. Senator make America's government more efficient?
Well, by being an independent senator is a good start to make sure that you can work legitimately and based on fact with both sides. That is a difference between Senator Shaheen and me. She does vote with the president and has voted with him over 99% of the time. I was 50-50. That being said, when you're talking about IRS, for example, there's a complete lack of trust between the American people and the federal government, not only on the IRS, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, Obamacare, the rollout. There are so many things right now where there's just a lack of trust, the border, what's happening in foreign policy. The IRS, for example, that's an area that I think we should talk about. Senator Shaheen was one of a handful of senators that wrote a letter to the IRS, Lois Lerner, to say, please, investigate these nonprofit groups that have maybe a different political view than we do. And unfortunately, Lois Lerner listened. And I have asked, and others have asked, for the correspondence between Senator Shaheen's office and the IRS to make sure that there was not undue influence used aside from the actual letter. And by the way, when you write a letter to a group, they listen. And they obviously listened here.
I'm going to give Senator Shaheen, Gene Shaheen 30 seconds to respond to that, and another 30 seconds for you, Scott Brown.
Well, again, this is a place where Scott Brown and I have very different views. I was one of the first senators to call for an audit of the IRS because they shouldn't be using undue influence on groups, whether they're on the right or on the left. But again, we have a very different view because I don't believe that so-called social service organizations should be allowed to get taxpayer write-offs for what they do if they're campaigning or involved in partisan politics. And I don't care whether it's on the left or the right. I think the Red Cross is a social service organization. I don't think the Koch brothers and Americans for Prosperity or the Majority PAC on the left are social service organizations, and they should not get
Thank you. Quiet,
taxpayer
please.
funding.
Thank you. Yes, Scott Brown, 30 seconds.
It's very easy in Washington to do something after you've already done something to put you in that situation. When you were a senator, you did write a letter to the IRS asking that those groups be investigated. And then after the fact, once the scandal broke, you said, oh, we need to audit the IRS. The very best way, because they've lost all of their records and their hard drives have crashed, is for you to release your records on your correspondence with Lois Lerner and the IRS. And there is a complete lack of trust right now between the American people and the federal government, and we need to try to help restore that.
Scott Brown, what was the last book you really enjoyed?
I just actually read Dan Brown, Rye Resident Inferno. Enjoyed it very, very much, but obviously haven't had much time to read anything more. I'm starting a couple of new books and look forward to having an opportunity to read them.
Thank you. Jean Shaheen, book you last read that you really enjoyed?
Well, what I'm reading right now, and it's slow going, I have to admit, is Robert Caro's book called The Path to Power about Lyndon Johnson. So I'm about 100 pages in, and we probably won't get a lot more time until after the election.
I've read them both very good books. Thank you both for them. We'll do the animal thing another time, though.
Interesting.
You're both running for the United States Senate. The Senate has the responsibility to advise and consent when it comes to Supreme Court appointments. The Supreme Court has been dealing with some very interesting issues that have led to extending the Bill of Rights to corporations. Hobby Lobby decision gave essentially a limited freedom of religion to corporations. The Citizens United decision gave a right of free speech to corporations. As you consider Supreme Court nominees as a United States Senator, what will you ask when it comes to, and what will your position be when it comes to the granting of the, particularly the Bill of Rights to corporations? Jean Shaheen.
I don't believe corporations are citizens, and I disagreed very strongly with the court's decision in Citizens United, where they said corporations could spend unlimited amounts of money as if in campaigns and could act as citizens. Again, this is a place where my opponent and I have different views. I also think we need to look at the Supreme Court as a bastion to uphold individual liberties. One of those individual liberties, I believe, is the right to privacy on behalf of women in reproductive choice. My opponent not only supported the Hobby Lobby decision, which would give employers the ability to deny employees access to contraceptive care, but he also, when Elena Kagan, a senator from the state of Massachusetts, which he was representing in the Senate, was nominated to the Supreme Court, he voted against her. I think we need Supreme Court justices who understand the importance of individual liberty, and that's what I would support.
Thank you. 1 minute.
To advise and consent is one of the most important things that we actually do. I've done it, and with regard to Justice Kagan, I didn't believe she had the appropriate amount of courtroom experience, and I made that crystal clear. With regard, may I start?
Please start again and start the time again. Yeah.
I'm going to speak right up.
Give us 1 second.
Thank you. With regard to advise and consent, it is one of the most important things that we do as senators. I take it very seriously. I want a judge that's not going to be an activist judge, that they'll interpret the Constitution. With regard to Justice Kagan, as Senator Shaheen referenced, I didn't believe she had the courtroom experience, simply put. With regard to your attempt to distort my record when it comes to women's rights, we're both pro-choice. We both believe that women should have access to health care. We both believe that, that I think we differ, however, a little bit on the Bill of Rights, since you brought it up. I believe that people and individuals should be able to practice their faith and not have the federal government mandate and taking away the most basic right, the right to religious freedom. And I also, when you're talking about the Bill of Rights, you were one of a handful of senators, once again, that joined forces to try to take away the freedom of speech and the ability to change the Bill of Rights when it comes to that very important issue. I'm not going to do that. So we do differ in that regard. I believe since you brought up the women's issues, that we should both, and we both agree that we should promote more adoptions, and that's what I will continue to work towards.
Just to drill down one more time, with regard to corporations being granted those rights given under the Bill of Rights, specifically free speech and what it has done with regard to funding for political campaigns and with regard to religious beliefs. How would you apply that?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer. The judges who were there, they made a very clear decision on both cases. If there are areas where we need to actually move forward and talk about it, I'm willing to listen, certainly. But when you take the federal government, why was there even a Hobby Lobby case? It's because of Obamacare, where they mandated that certain actions be taken. To think that I don't support women's rights and the ability to get contraception is just a false premise. I have since I was 18 years old. The fact that we have these decisions being made by the Supreme Court, if there are holes and there are things that we need to fix, we need to do it so there's no misunderstanding and there's no favoritism, especially when it comes to the free speech issue.
Thank you. Were you all able to hear that clearly? No, I guess I'm going to up here a little bit and tilt it towards you. I'm going to ask you to lean down a little bit further.
I'll lean down.
If you could just summarize, take 10 more seconds to sort of summarize that.
Well, I'll let it speak for itself, but if we're going to be talking about issues affecting people and their rights, we need to make sure that we all sit in a room together and figure out what the problem is so they can be applied equally, that there's no special interest carve-outs for one group over another, especially when it comes to the decision regarding free speech.
Thank you. And if there is someone from the hotel who can crank us up a little bit, not me, but these folks, I'd appreciate
You're
that.
doing a good job.
I'm fully cranked up, yeah, there's no question about it. Jean Shaheen, could you take another 30 seconds specifically to this topic?
Well, I think you have to not listen just to what Scott Brown has to say about this issue with respect to pro-choice, but you have to look at what he's done. When he was in the Senate, he was a sponsor of something called the Blunt Amendment, which was an amendment that would have given any employer, for any moral reason, the ability to deny any employee the right to any health care benefit. And it was aimed at denying women access to contraceptive care. He voted in the Senate to defund Planned Parenthood. The fact is, we have a religious bypass that allows religious organizations not to have to provide contraceptive care to their employees, and we have taken care of the religious objections. So the Blunt Amendment, excuse me, this effort was not about religious freedom. It was about denying access to contraceptive coverage for women.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Monitor, if I may respond, since she's misrepresenting my record.
Very briefly.
Thank you. I was one of a handful of senators who actually voted to fund Planned Parenthood. Senator, actually, the group that's supporting you actually praised me for that effort. I was also one of the prime sponsors on the Violence Against Women Act, because I remember fighting for women since I was 5 years old, when my mom and myself were being abused by a drunk stepfather. So when it comes to fighting for women's rights, Senator, with all respect, I've been doing it since I was 5 years old.
I'm going to enter the topic that you've all just been waiting for, which is the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. I will use those terms interchangeably. And I'll start with Scott Brown. I probably won't be quite as balanced in the way I ask the question. I'll aim it slightly differently at the two candidates in this particular case. Scott Brown, would you vote, as you have said, to repeal Obamacare if there was not in place a replacement for it that addressed issues around pre-existing conditions, around 26-year-olds having access, and that would simply take away the right to the availability of medical insurance to tens of thousands of New Hampshire citizens who have signed up for insurance under Obamacare?
Well, you're assuming that Obamacare is the only answer, and I respectfully disagree. It's a false premise. I believe we can do it better with the states. We can actually respect those rights and freedoms. We can actually address the very things that you talked about and that Senator Shaheen and I care about. But you look at Obamacare and the VA, I think that Obamacare is going to be the VA pretty soon. It's going to be top-heavy. It's going to be broken. I believe we can do it better. Now, as you remember, Senator Shaheen said you could keep your doctor, you can keep your hospital, you can keep your care facility, you may get a check for $2,500. We found out that that's not true. 10 of our 26 hospitals are outside of the network. It's broken. We can do it better. We can protect the rights and freedoms, the pre-existing conditions, the catastrophic care. If that's what's important to you, sir, then let's go and move forward and get it done. I believe that we can do it better than the federal government. I believe that we should have access and people should be allowed to get health care. I understand the issue. I look forward to being part of that solution.
30 seconds more, Scott Brown. I apologize if I didn't ask the question clearly enough.
Would I repeal it? Yes, I would repeal it. I voted 5 times to repeal it.
Would you repeal it if there were not in place a replacement for these functions?
We can have a mechanism in place to make sure that folks who are actually having insurance, they have the ability to opt out. They can go back to the plans that they know and love. The insurance companies and others in business would love to have that opportunity, because the #1 issue right now affecting businesses is that wet blanket of Obamacare. Because don't forget, business owners, the business mandate is coming in after the election. You speak to any business owner right now, it's Obamacare, the tentacles of that affecting their business. They're not going over 50 employees. They're not allowing people like my mom, who was on welfare, the ability to work 60 hours. They're hurting not only women-owned businesses with the taxes and the amazing amount of regulation. So yes, I would vote to repeal it and work very hard with our state leaders. I think we have very competent leaders to put in place something that works for us.
Jean Shaheen, you have come out in opposition to the medical device tax, which is one of the few aspects of Obamacare that help fund the hundreds of billions, arguably trillions of dollars over a number of years that it will cost. How are you going to fund Obamacare on an ongoing basis without simply adding massive amounts to our already massive deficit?
Well, first of all, the Congressional Budget Office has said if we repealed the Affordable Care Act, it would add over $1 trillion to this country's deficit. So that's, again, a false premise. The fact is, I believe everybody in New Hampshire and in this country should have access to quality, affordable health care. When we passed the Affordable Care Act, it now has given about 100,000 people in New Hampshire access to care who didn't have it. As I was coming in today, I met a man outside who said that the Affordable Care Act had saved his life. Thanks to the bipartisan plan that passed the state Senate with the support of the governor, we have people who expanded Medicaid, so people who are low income can now get access to care. And I don't believe what Scott Brown is proposing would throw tens of thousands of people off of their health care. It will put us back into a system where the insurance companies could deny care for people who have pre-existing conditions, where they could say that women could be discriminated against for being women, young people could no longer be on their parents' health care, people on Medicare would be denied help for prescription drug coverage that's available under the law. So I think repealing it and having no plan is not the answer.
You notice I have brought the two candidates together. They both agree that my premises are no good and the questions that I ask. Just to clarify my premise in this particular case, in the early years of Obamacare, it is, excuse me, very much a negative impact on our budget and adding many billions of dollars to our deficit. Is there any means that you would believe we should act on in order to fund those early years of Obamacare, remembering that the later years when we're supposedly going to come out ahead depend on a lot of assumptions?
Well, one of the things that we've seen as the result of the Affordable Care Act is we've seen the health care costs flatten in this country. That's due to a number of things, but there's good reason to believe that the Affordable Care Act has contributed to that. And part of it is because of some of the delivery system reforms. You know, Dartmouth-Hitchcock is a leader in how we provide health care to people. And those delivery system reforms, the way we deliver health care, are providing significant savings now as the result of the work that Dartmouth-Hitchcock and other hospital systems across this country are doing. So next year we're going to have 4 new carriers in our insurance exchange here in New Hampshire. That's going to be important because it will give more options for people. There are things about the law that we need to fix, and I'm committed to working to fix them. I think it would be a refreshing change if we could actually get people on both sides of the aisle in the Senate to work together to address the concerns about what might not be working on the Affordable Care Act.
And Scott Brown, one more minute on the costs associated with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. What do you say to the business owners who do provide insurance to their employees and who have, as part of the cost of that insurance, have been for all these years subsidizing the cost of all those uninsured individuals who show up at hospital emergency rooms and who are guaranteed treatment in those hospital emergency rooms? Aren't they also tired of subsidizing those costs, and doesn't Obamacare actually provide some support for them?
You know what's really the issue when it comes to Obamacare is the fact that hospitals are not happy, doctors are being squeezed, the Medicare reimbursements are very low. Right now in your rehab facilities and nursing homes, there's also a very real challenge where they're pushing our loved ones out of the system earlier. When Senator Shaheen indicated that she was looking forward to fix it, she had many opportunities to do that when it was first passed. I was there. She voted against every ability to, in fact, do that. When you're talking about the costs, you know what the costs associated with businesses right now? The Cadillac tax. Teachers, firefighters, police officers, they are going to be hurt. 2017, they're going to be penalized, the cities and towns, and those people are going to get lesser plans. Right now, you're getting your bills, folks. The businesses are getting their bills. The costs are higher. The plans are lower. They're making determinations whether they're going to provide insurance at all in any way, shape, or form. What I have done is I have been visiting those businesses. It is the #1 issue. And the business mandate coming in after the election. And by the way, after the election, apparently we're going to get more health care companies. Well, when Senator Shaheen was in charge, she actually changed the law that forced those companies to we only had one. So we can do it better. And I have had an experience on this issue. I look forward to participating in the process.
Scott Brown, do you take naps?
You know, it's funny you say that. The running joke in our family is that the answer is absolutely not. No, I don't take naps.
Okay. No, and his wife is agreeing. Jean Shaheen, do you ever take naps?
No time.
No time to take naps. I take naps all the time, and you two are interrupting it, actually.
When the Patriots played last week, though, I took an early nap.
Yeah, no, did you stay up and watch them last night, though?
I did.
Okay, all right. So we're feeling a little bit better about that. Scott Brown, the Snowden leaking of information has taught us an awful lot about the degree to which the NSA and other aspects of the federal government have been collecting information on us as individuals. There's a balance to that because there are a lot of people in the Congress and in the bureaucracy that believe that information is important to our safety. Are we at the right place in terms of the balance between our privacy and our safety, or are we out of balance one direction or the other?
Yeah, I believe we're out of balance. What started as a program that was meant to be credible is now, quite frankly, creepy. And you've had a situation where the organization has, I believe, gone over its original authority. So here's the issue. We want to make sure that we can find people who are going to kill us, change our way of life. And I have such great respect for the men and women who serve not only in law enforcement, but in Homeland Security to make sure that they do that very thing. But we do have to strike a balance. And what is the balance? By protecting our constitutional rights and our rights to freedom and religion and free speech, balancing that with the right to basically stay alive and not be killed by people coming here to try to kill us. And in order to do that, I believe it starts with the border. We need to secure the border. And that's a real difference between Senator Shaheen and me. She's voted not to secure the border and not to send troops to the border, and I have. And I will continue to work to try to make sure that we, in fact, do that.
Jean Shaheen, could you talk about that balance between security and privacy?
I do think we can balance our national security and protect citizens' privacy. I think we need to make our foreign intelligence surveillance courts more open. We need to look at having an advocate there who can argue on behalf of privacy concerns. I voted for that. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. But I want to go back to the border because, again, this is a big difference between Scott Brown and me because I have supported comprehensive immigration reform. That immigration reform, which was supported by Senator Ayotte and by a majority of the senators, passed with a strong bipartisan vote, includes first border security. It would give 700 miles to a border fence. It would almost double the number of Border Patrol agents from 21,000. It would add almost over 19,000 more agents. It would provide resources for additional surveillance and interdiction efforts. It would provide an e-verify system so that people who are concerned about whether someone applying for a job might be an illegal, they could check that out immediately. And then it deals with our visa system, which, as people in the tourism industry know, does not always work so well for all of you. So this is legislation that if the House took it up tomorrow, they would pass it. What I think Scott Brown ought to be doing is talking to the Speaker of the House, talking to his friends on the Republican side, and urge them to take up this legislation. Even the former chair of the Republican Party in New Hampshire said that Scott Brown was using the border issue for political reasons. We need a serious approach to address this.
Excuse me.
Jean Shaheen went over her time and morphed into my next question anyway, so I'd like to give the next minute to Scott Brown specifically to talk about, and specifically to ask whether or not you would have voted for that particular piece of legislation around immigration.
Well, let's talk about the border. It's not secure, it's not porous, and let's talk about the facts. Senator Shaheen had occasions to, in fact, make the effort to secure the border and send troops. She's chosen not to. In addition, they went on vacation. There are 2 bills pending right now from the House that Harry Reid would not take up, and Senator Shaheen did not speak up before she went on vacation. There's also an issue dealing with people who are coming back to hurt and kill us. The 60 Minutes piece has identified 12 of them. She says now that she wants to take away their passports, but she's had many opportunities. A bill that Senator Lieberman and I and others filed almost 3 years ago. Another bill that was filed recently. She did not sign on to it. She did not co-sponsor it. She did not raise her hand and object to the Harry Reid not taking up those very important issues to strip that citizenship from those individuals who were coming back to hurt and kill us. No, I would not have supported that bill because it still did not address the one thing that is very important. Whatever we do on these very important issues, I can't provide and continue to provide incentives and rewarding that illegality by EBT cards, preferential housing, and I did not believe that the mechanisms in there were strong enough to address that very real issue. And I also believe that it dealt with the amnesty issue a little bit too leniently.
Well, let's stay there for one more minute. In terms of dividing it up into 2 pieces, the specific actions you would take with regard to making the border more secure and the specific steps you would take to address the 11, 12, however many million individuals who are in the country today. Could you describe both of those in some detail in the next minute?
Sure, Al. I'm not sure I can do it in a minute, but I think it's important. There are different spheres. We should apply. Somebody who goes to college, they should get a diploma and the ability to stay here. The high-skilled workers, if we need them, let's get them here. If the seasonal workers, let's do it. It's being held up by politics. Let's raise the quotas for those who are, in fact, trying to get here legally. Let's find a way to get the 4.6 million people processed. What is it? Is it computers? Is it folks that don't have the ability to, what's the reason? It's not by not securing the border. I would secure the border. We've had votes on that. I voted for it. Senator Shaheen did not. With regard to the incentives, I'm not in favor of the DREAM Act and the ability for the president to use his executive order to expand the definition of refugee and provide incentives for other people to come here and get those incentives and get those rewards. We have to make sure that we secure those children, secure them, make sure they're cared for, and then we need to return them home because we have a mechanism already in place with our embassies to deal with those issues. With regard to the 11, 10 million, whatever it is, whatever we do, whatever conversation that I have, we need to make sure that we don't reward that illegality and continue to provide those incentives during that process. That's it. That's all I have time for. I'm sorry.
And if you could, and you've said some of it, but specifically, how do we make the border secure, more secure than it is today, and what do you do with 11 million people already in this country illegally?
Well, again, this is where Scott Brown and I have very different views, because the way to make the border secure is to do some of the things that are in that legislation. And his suggestion that I wouldn't support sending troops to the border, it's because we had just sent 1,200 troops to the border. When that legislation was filed, it was filed on a bill that would have held up funding for our troops, the overseas funding for our troops. So that was not the way to address it. The way to address it is the way we did in the bipartisan legislation that was approved by the Senate. Senator Ayotte and I both voted for it, It provides for additional border security, almost double the number of border agents, 700 miles of fence, more money for interdiction and surveillance efforts, that E-Verify system, and it would have also dealt with the 11 million people who are here illegally, because they would have gotten in line behind the people who are here legally, and it would have said they have to pay fines, they have to learn English, they have to pay their taxes in order to qualify to continue to be here. So this was a bill that had support of both the left in the Senate and the right in the Senate. We need to fix our broken immigration system, and the way to do it is not to refuse to go to hearings on border security.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator. It's twice now that she's commented on my hearing attendance. That's an issue that I think we should talk about.
Let's spend 30 seconds, each of you, on hearing attendance.
Thank you.
I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm gonna sit right there.
She's referring to Homeland Security. I'm a 35-year member of the military. I understand the border issues. That's why I, in fact, voted to secure it and send the troops. I don't need an additional hearing on that issue. On 4 hearings, 2 subcommittees, serving in the National Guard. I've never criticized Senator Shaheen or any senator for not attending hearings. It's a question of what hearings you're referring to. On ISIS in particular, she missed a very important hearing talking about that very important issue. That's the only thing I've ever questioned her on. I've never expected her or any other senator to be there 100% of the time. It's quite frankly not possible with all the committees that me and she and others have.
Shaheen.
Well, I agree it's not possible to be there 100% of the time because we all have overlapping hearings. But when you make one of the hallmarks of your campaign border security, and you missed every single hearing on that issue when you were on the Homeland Security Committee, then I think there's a difference. And so I think we can agree that most people in the Senate do their best to get to most of the hearings that are before them. That's certainly what I have tried to do, and I'm sure that most of the time that's what my opponent tried to do.
The state of Washington passed a law that said that that teachers could not be evaluated, their performance could not be evaluated on the basis of test results from tests associated with the Common Core. As a result, the state of Washington apparently is losing tens of millions of dollars in federal funding because they're not complying with the Race to the Top legislation. That's a specific example. The big question is, what's the role of the federal government in K through 12 education? And have we crossed the line in terms of level of imposition by the federal government? Or are we not creating the type of educational system that America needs to be competitive in the 21st century? Or both?
Well, one of the things that the federal government does is provide funding for schools. And I think having something in place for those schools that says in order to get that funding, you need to do X, Y, or Z, does make some sense. But I think in the case of Washington State, the federal government may have gone too far. I do think it's important for us to look at the job that teachers are doing. When I was governor, we worked to make sure that we tested teachers in their area of expertise so that we knew that they were actually teaching what they should be teaching and that students were learning. And we put in place school report cards so that people could look at how the schools were doing and see how to improve them. So I think this is an issue where local districts are the ones that really should decide what their students learn. But the federal government, because it helps to fund so many programs, weighs in on these issues.
And just 30-second follow-up on that. Are they weighing in too much? Is the federal government imposing its will too directly on our local school districts and our states?
Well, as I said, I think they weighed in too heavily with Washington State. Here in New Hampshire, we have a waiver that would allow us to address the concerns that the Department of Education has listed with respect to Common Core. And I think as long as we have that ability to get by whatever the issue is so that it works for us here in New Hampshire, so that it works for our local school districts, then that's okay.
Scott Brown, 90 seconds on the role of the federal government in our K through 12 educational system. I'm going to ask you a specific question. If you could, would you repeal the race to the top legislation?
I supported the race to the top legislation when I had the opportunity, providing certain mechanisms were made.
Speak up a little bit
Thank
more.
you. I try to look at you when I speak.
I know that. Yeah, and I appreciate
So
it.
I supported the race to the top legislation, providing it had in place certain mechanisms. However, this is a whole different animal. You have right now the federal government incentivizing, almost bribing cities and towns to do certain things, Common Core, something Senator Shaheen supports. I don't. I believe it should be done better at the local level. They are the best stewards of their children and their town's education, including the state. To say that she just said that she thinks that it's best at the local level, so Common Core doesn't allow that. It's another example of the federal government imposing its rights, chipping away at our rights and freedoms. So you throw in Obamacare, you throw in the EPA. By the way, the EPA is now circumventing the laws, expanding the definition of waterways so they can control all of our waterways. And in New Hampshire, with all respect, that's real, that's personal, to go into people's property and in people's businesses and address these things. And these are the things that she supports, and quite frankly, I don't. I believe we can do it better at the local level.
One more question specific to Common Core. It's not directly imposed upon the states to
When you have money associated with it, it's very difficult to turn it down. And when you have the federal government, as you referenced in your initial question to Senator Shaheen, that one state chose to stand up to the federal government, they said, you're not getting that money. So I have to respectfully disagree. When you're throwing money around, like drunken sailors, they're going to take that money, and if they don't, then they're going to be penalized. And that's the problem with the federal government.
Is there any specific aspect of the Common Core curriculum that troubles you?
I believe we can do, the fact that they're changing the entire way that our children are being taught in the role of teachers, I believe that we can do it better, much better at the local level, because we have some incredible educators in our state that want that opportunity. And if you go and you speak to those grammar school and middle school and high school teachers, they're very, very frustrated that they're not able to work through something and use their own creativity and ingenuity.
Thank you. Jean Shaheen, could you comment in general on Common Core and your support for it and your concerns about it?
Well, New Hampshire adopted it. The Senate wasn't involved in making that determination. And certainly I think, and I have supported efforts for funding to go to the state of New Hampshire and other states to help with students who are developmentally disabled. I think special education is one place where the federal government has not kept its mandate to local states and local school districts, and we need to address that. So I think there are programs that are important that we have required and that the state has bought into. Again, Common Core is one of those, and school districts can debate and decide what they want to do, and states can as well.
A couple of relatively short answer, 30-second questions the audience was apparently particularly interested in. One is marijuana. The number of states, including New Hampshire, have liberalized marijuana laws at the state level. The federal government continues to have laws that are very restrictive with regard to the use of marijuana. Do you support ending the role of the federal government in the control of marijuana and leaving it to the states, or do you think there's a continued role for the federal government to attempt to impose laws that the states apparently aren't supporting?
Well, I think New Hampshire moved in a positive direction when it allowed medicinal marijuana. I don't think recreational marijuana use is appropriate right now. I think we can see how Colorado and Washington State are going to deal with that issue. And I think the federal government still has a role to play in terms of education, in terms of treatment, in terms of supporting law enforcement as they deal with illegal drug issues.
So you would leave the level of federal restriction in place?
I would, as I said, I believe the federal government has a role to play when it comes to education efforts, when it comes to supporting law enforcement, and when it comes to helping with treatment efforts. So yes, I do think that's important to leave in place. One of the things that I've been working on is the heroin epidemic that we have here in parts of New Hampshire and New England. And that's an epidemic that we need everybody to work together to address. Local law enforcement, the treatment community, the federal government. And so I do think there's a role on a serious issue like this for everybody to work together.
Scott Brown, marijuana, full minute if you need it.
Well, thank you. I agree with Senator Shaheen on the epidemic associated with heroin. Is there a causal connection between marijuana and other drug use? I would argue that there is. I believe others would agree with that. The difference we have on medicinal purposes, I want to make sure it's an FDA-approved medicinal marijuana that would allow some type of regulation so that's just not willy-nilly. That being said, anybody who cannot get care and coverages or relief from traditional treatment and drugs should have that final option. I don't want to be like Colorado and other states that just have the shops popping up all over the place. I think it sends a bad message to our youth.
Would you eliminate federal criminal penalties for marijuana?
I am not changing or looking to change the federal penalties right now.
Thank you. Scott Brown, would you support legislation to place limits on the size of magazines of guns? 30 seconds.
No, I would not.
Jean Shaheen?
Yes, I voted to do that.
Thank you. Jean Shaheen, what's your favorite movie?
Casablanca.
Scott Brown.
Love Humphrey Bogart.
I like Ingrid Bergman, but each to your own. Yes.
I actually have two, Braveheart and The Patriot. I enjoyed them both very much.
Were you pleased to see the Scottish vote in favor of retention of membership in Great Britain?
I have no real opinion on that. The Scots and the English can do whatever they want. I want to focus on what's important for New Hampshire.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. I am going to begin wrapping things up here, and I'm going to ask Jean Shaheen to provide us with a closing statement of up to 90 seconds if she needs it, because we have enough time to be able to do that. Usually I run out of that time. I'm going to ask Jean Shaheen to speak. Please hold your applause to the end, but you may be heard when she is done speaking. Jean Shaheen.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all of you for being such an attentive audience. I think in our answers today, you've heard some of the differences between Scott Brown and me on what we think should be the role of the federal government and what we should do to address our economic issues. You know, one of the areas where there are big differences is in how we support business growth. I think we need to support our small businesses. New Hampshire has a small business economy. That's why I supported the Small Business Jobs Act that would have invested in helping our small businesses get access to exports, access to credit, tax breaks. It passed in 2010 when Scott Brown was in the Senate representing Massachusetts, and he voted against it. I think we should support our tourism industry. It's New Hampshire's second largest industry. I voted for something called the Travel Promotion Act, which for the first time allows this country to advertise overseas, to bring in visitors from out of the country. One of the lessons I learned from Dick Hamilton at White Mountain Attractions was that visitors, when they come from another country, stay longer and they spend more money. And this is a bill that had no cost to taxpayers. It was fully paid for by a surcharge on visas from other countries, and yet Scott Brown voted against it. Perhaps because he doesn't understand the New Hampshire economy and what we need to do here to grow our small businesses, to invest in the middle class, because when he represented Massachusetts in the United States Senate, he supported big corporations, he supported those tax loopholes. He was not there for our small businesses. So thank you all very much. I hope you will continue to look at this race and decide that you can support me.
Scott Brown, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. It's good to see Senator Shaheen. I want to thank everybody for coming, all of the folks here to report it. The only thing worse than voting with the president 99% of the time is actually having a zero is actually having a 0 rating with the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Now, it's easy to talk about a bill or two that's failed because they were going to either raise taxes or fees, or that Senator Gregg and others voted against. But when you actually get the independent rating from that premier independent business group where Senator Shaheen had a 0 rating, it's easy to talk about what you're doing for small businesses, but I have their endorsement. I have the Chamber's endorsement because they recognize that I was not the deciding vote on Obamacare, that I want to make sure that there's a lower energy prices. I want to make sure that the regulatory scheme is not going to be crushing businesses. When you're looking at the challenges for men and women-owned businesses, folks, they're real. Just go get out of Washington and go back and talk to folks because they understand what's next. The business mandate's next. If you don't think it's real, then you're not paying attention. Our Cadillac tax from our police and fire and teachers, that's next too. These are real. I'm running because I care about our state. I care about our country. I'm trying to move forward in an independent manner. If your issue is gridlock, then I'm the guy to send down there. I was 50-50, and what does that mean to you? We did the insider trading bill. We did the Hire a Hero Veterans bill. We did the 3% withholding, the Arlington Cemetery bill. I encourage you to look these things up because I was able to get those good Democrats over here to sign on and be part of the solution. The gridlock is crushing businesses and individuals' hopes, and I want to have a chance to go down and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One more moment, ladies and gentlemen. We are not the population center of New Hampshire. It is a big deal to have 2 candidates for statewide office willing to come up here, spend this time with us, look at us face to face to be heard. For both of them, please. And one more second. I believe this is the only debate they'll participate in which they receive a gift when they're done. So please take the time, shake hands with them, and thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
And one more thing, we have 2 more debates coming up. On the 16th, we have the debate for District 1, Frank Gitter and Carol Shea Porter, and on Halloween, we have the debate for the governor. Please attend.
Thank you very much. Linda, thank you. Great.
My pleasure.
I'm Scotty Mallett with the Bartlett Roundhouse Preservation Club,